the first thing before we get into like the players and the contracts is I wanted to like just make clear, and I wrote about this at The Athletic earlier in the week, but where they're at or where they have been this season and last season, 2024 and 2025, just from a payroll standpoint, because we tend to focus on the raw number. In other words, 135 million or 160 million, or we're afraid they're going to get to 100 million, that sort of thing. And that's obviously relevant because when they're signing and trading for guys, they're dealing in today's raw numbers.
Sure.
But within the context of MLB as a whole, the 30-team environment, the Twins and the 29 other teams, the raw numbers go up every year. Even for the Twins, they should be going up every year. Instead, they don't. And what I mean by that is like you might sit there and go, well, okay, they slashed payroll from 160 3 years ago to 130 something the past 2 years. Well, that sucks. But 130 is still a whole lot higher than it was 10 years ago or 20 years ago. Well, yeah, but think of
everything's everything. Eggs cost a whole lot more.
Right. Like that's just how it works. And Major League Baseball sort of mimics the world in that sense, is that typically year over year. Now there are some exceptions like lockout years, COVID affected years, obviously recently, but generally speaking, the league-wide payrolls are going up 3 to 8% pretty much every year, some years more than that. And, I expect next year's league average, the 2026 league average for all 30 teams, to be over 180 million. So in that sense, you have to look at the raw number. Yeah, that's important, but you should be looking at the raw number relative to the other 29 teams. Because, if the Twins are spending more than they did 10 years ago, that's okay, that's fine. But if other teams are spending 50% more than they did and the Twins are spending 20% more, their actual kind of buying power has decreased. So I looked at where they were at, and this is sad to even have this conversation, but this is the reality that we're in now, where they were at in the last 5 seasons they spent at the Metrodome, which is 2005 through 2009. And then in 2010, they moved into Target Field with the promise of bigger spending and more competitive spending and all that stuff. In their last 5 seasons at the Metrodome, 2005 to 2009, combined, they spent 77% of the major league average payroll over that time. So, another way to say that is they were about a quarter lower than average.
Sure.
The past 2 seasons, following 2023, when they spent 160, which by the way was below average, then they cut 30-something million from it right away, and we've seen the on-field results. We've seen the off-field results of that too. 2024, they ended up spending 76% of the major league average. And then this season, once you actually account for the trade deadline sell-offs and what they actually ended up with versus what their payroll was on opening day, because they shed tens of millions throughout the season, they spent 77% of the major league average. So again, in the 5 final years at the Metrodome, they spent 77% of the major league average. And in the past 2 years, they've spent 77% of the funny how that works.
Yeah, perfect.
So that is not just a depressing footnote to add, although
they were drawing better in the Metrodome, by the way.
Right.
They had better attendance. Yeah,
that's true. Yeah. Obviously, like we hinted at the beginning of this, the fear that sucks. 77% of the major league average. That wasn't what anybody was promised. That wasn't what anybody was even, hinting at, or even without taking anything the Twins said, the notion that we're going to move into a new ballpark. We're really not going to have much success in that new ballpark. In fact, I think 6 of the first 8 years were losing seasons in the new ballpark. And then by year 15 in that ballpark, which obviously it's not new anymore at this point, we're just going to be right back to the exact level of relative spending compared to the rest of the league that we were in the decrepit Metrodome that everyone felt like we got to get out of this place so we can continue to be competitive. And as you said, they won more and they drew better in the Metrodome. Right. Exactly. Now that's just, they had a better team at that point. But but the fear obviously is, as bad as it sounds, to be right back to that 77% number, which it is intriguing to me that they are exactly at the number they were at.
That is funny. Yeah.
Which
almost as if they're targeting it.
Right. Which kind of tells me that is the water level that the Pohlads will sink or float to naturally, which is about 3/4 of the major league average, which I guess kind of makes sense. I don't mean makes sense like that's what they should be doing, but like if you just said to me, what do you expect the poll ads if left to their own devices? I'd say, yeah, about 3/4 of what everyone else is spending.
Yeah, I mean, and in terms of just sort of metropolitan size, we are not we are not fully middle of the pack. We are not 15th. Twin Cities is the 16th, 17th, 18th biggest metropolitan area, and then a couple of those metropolitan areas have 2 teams.
Yeah,
so
although some don't have any.
Well,
they're
that's
ahead
true.
of them. There's a couple at least. There's like some California ones and stuff that don't have a team. Now you can attach them to other teams basically.
Right,
but,
that's right. Yeah,
I mean, I think we talked about this before. I think they're like something like 18th really.
Mm-hmm.
If you double count the New Yorks and you double count the Chicagos and et cetera, they end up like 18th or something. I mean, I can tell you, and if people have been listening for more than a few years, they listen to us say this sort of thing in 2023. It's funny. I saw a Twin Cities Business Journal article that
I have not seen said article yet. I'm gonna have to check if I can get my hands on said article.
I don't know. I can recap it for you.
Okay.
Not surprisingly, Twin Cities Business Journal is in favor of the poll ads. They're great business leaders.
Okay.
Great business leaders. But one of the things in the article said, places like The Athletic and Twins Daily, which thank you for listening to the show, I guess, because who's going to say that without listening to the show? Keep insisting that the poll ads spend 70% of their revenues. No, we've never said anything like that. And in fact, we have said that the hope is to spend 51% of revenue in a typical year. And the reason we say that is because the former president of the Twins, Dave St. Peter, used to come on the show once a year for sort of a State of the Twins interview, which he ceased doing at some point. And he was the one who told us the target is 50% of revenue. Whatever we make, we spend half on the team. And if you kind of do the math on that, which they've gotten away from that clearly, but if 70% of revenue would be, I'd throw a party for that. No, not a single person has ever said that.
Sure.
But this kind of relates to what I was saying about 77% of Major League average. And I realize I'm throwing a bunch of percentages at people. It's confusing, but that's not good. But we're not sitting here. And again, you can go back to 2023 and listen. When they were spending 160 in 2023, that was like 90-something% of the average. It was still below average by $5 or $10 million. We weren't complaining at all about that.
No, we were lauding it. Yeah.
And I'm not saying, they deserve a party thrown for them for spending slightly below average, but
right.
We're realistic, or at least I like to at least think we're realistic about what we kind of have expected from the poll ads in terms of spending, which is that if the Major League average is 175, try to spend 160, 165. If the Major League average next year is 185, try to spend 170 or something like that. Like, just be competitive. We listen. We live in Minnesota. We recognize this isn't New York. It's not Chicago. There's a bunch of markets ahead of them that is going to make more money and spend more money. No one. It's like we don't start every offseason by going, why don't they sign Shohei Ohtani? It's like we're relatively realistic. And what really kind of frustrates, I think, is even when you are relatively realistic and you're just sort of expecting them to be somewhere close to averageness, and then they fall so short of that by $20 million. Well, that's when you sit there and you go,
right.
What are we doing here? So within that context, we're not pushing the idea that they should be spending 110% of the Major League average. I would be happy with 90% of the Major League average.
And welcome to the end of this video. There's lots more. For another, just click on one of these boxes.
Or click on this circle in the middle to subscribe to all of our Twins Talk.
Thank you.